You don't speak it, talk. I need another song. Anyway, we will be continuing the reading of White Malice. This is going to be after the independence of Belgian Congo. A lot happened. And to those who have been following this, right? So let's just continue. Right. So, Year of Africa. Ghana was one of the first nations to open an embassy in Independence Congo. Andrew Ginn, Nkrummah's personal envoy in Leopoldville, was appointed Ghana's official ambassador. The embassy was centrally located in the city on the steep bank of the Congo River. Ginn worked with Ghana's government to send to the Congo some of the professionals it so badly needed. Doctors, nurses, policemen, engineers, electricians, civil servants, and other trained personnel. Some of them flew to the Congo in Egyptian planes, while others went by Ghana Airways, flown by Ghanaians. The Congolese who saw these planes arriving could hardly believe their eyes. With fewer than 20 university graduates in their own country, they were stunned to see pilots with black skin. On the day of the Congo's independence, Ghana's Daily Graphic published a full-page article about its new prime minister. Lumumber rose to power from a prison cell. It was written by a Swiss journalist, Francois Bondi, who was the editor of the French magazine Province, which, like the UK-based Encounter, the Italian Tempo Presente, and the Latin American Cuadernos, was affiliated with the Paris-based Congress for Cultural Freedom and funded covertly by the CIA. Bondi had joined the CCF in 1950, becoming the director of his publications. The following year, he established Province, which he edited until 1969. It swiftly became one of the most important literary reviews in Europe as a magazine aiming at an Atlanticist, anti-neutralist, and pro-American consensus, observes Francis Tono Saunders in Who Paid the Piper. Province was unmistakably the house organ of the Congress. It was based and published in Paris, the home of the CCF headquarters, and thus had a closer relationship with the CCF than the Congress's other journals. The London Times later described Province as one of the decisive weapons of the West in the cultural Cold War with the communist East. Bondi, it claimed, helped to win the Cold War intellectually long before it was won over politically. As well as editing Province, Bondi wrote on occasion for the Forum Service, a syndication organization that mailed articles to editors in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Offering free reproduction rights, it was a CIA front, later known as Forum World Features, which the New York Times in 1977 described as perhaps the most widely circulated of the CIA-owned news services. According to the journalist Russell Warren Ho, who had links with the CIA, it was set up to provide what was regarded as balanced, informed reporting for the press of developing countries. It was possibly through the Forum Service that Bundy's article on Lumumber reached the Daily Graphic. Bundy reported that upon his arrival in the Congo, he had first seen Lumumber's face on the shirt of his taxi driver, where it was printed on the front and back with the inscription Independence 30 June. Finding Lumumber in person was more challenging, however. He finally caught up with him in Stanleyville, where he hung around Lumumber's home and office, hoping for an interview. All of a sudden, the Prime Minister suggested going for a drive and a chat. We got into his open American cab, reported Bundy, and the chauffeur drove off. From all streets, there echoed the cry, Uhuru. Whenever Lumumber traveled somewhere, observed Bundy, his journey lasts many hours, since in every village, the inhabitants throw trees in the road, block the route, and refuse to let him go until he has made a speech. In Bundy's account, the All-African People's Conference in Accra in 1958 is given significance as an event that played a decisive role in the history of the Congo. Bundy's article reveals an open mind in relation to Lumumber, whom he portrays sympathetically as someone with unshakable calm. It shows, too, that Lumumber was hugely popular in the Congo, a perception shared by Bronson Tweedy, who was concerned to prevent any Stop Lumumber campaign on the grounds that Lumumber was one of the few, if not only, Congolese leaders with a Congo-wide appeal and standing. Neither Bundy nor Tweedy at this stage were showing any of the antipathy for Lumumber that was felt so strongly by Bill Borden and Larry Devlin. But Bundy's article demonstrates far more interest in white people, whom he referred to as Europeans, than with the majority population of the Congo. Bundy concluded his article with a tribute to Belgian colonization as a form of rule, which, for all its sin and shortcomings, may justly be described as the great, even noble legacy of the Belgian administration. On his way to the Belgian Congo, Bundy traveled via Brazzaville, which he described as the sleepy and dilapidated capital of the French Congo. While there, he heard Lumumber's name constantly. Possibly he met with Lumumber's friend Luis Lopez Alvarez, who was also a member of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Both men had published articles in Cuadernos. But whereas Lopez Alvarez, was almost certainly ignorant of the CIA's role in the Congress, it seems likely that Bundy knew of it. Stono Saunders includes him in the list of those who were aware that Mike Joselson, who had set up the Congress and managed it in Paris, and with whom Bundy worked closely, was a CIA agent. Not all of them were witting, in the sense that they were active participants in the deception. Comments Stono Saunders. But they all knew and had known for some time. And if they didn't, they were, said their critics, cultivatively and culpably ignorant. Chantal Hunt, the wife of Joselson's assistant, John Hunt, told Stono Saunders in 1997 that she was surprised that anyone involved with the CCF in Paris would deny knowledge of the agency's role. She herself had worked for the French Ministry of Culture and briefly for the CCF. Everyone in France, in my circle at least, she told Stono Saunders, knew the truth about who was behind the Congress. They all talk about it. They will say, why do you want to go and work there? It's CIA. Everyone knew except, apparently, those who worked for it. Isn't that odd? I always thought so. At the time of the All African People's Conference in 1958, there were only 9 independent countries across Africa. But in 1960 alone, 17 African nations became independent. And by the end of the year, Africa represented 1/4 of the United Nations member states. Bonche says 60 is Year of Africa, reported the New York Times on 17 February 1960. A slogan that was picked up widely and with enthusiasm. There was a growing sense of hope and optimism across the continent. But the injustices continued. On the 21st March of that year, in the town of Sharpeville, South Africa, the police opened fire on a peaceful protest against the racist pass laws, which required Black South Africans to carry pass books at all times. 69 unarmed people were massacred, and many were badly injured. This was a defining moment in South Africa's freedom struggle. In solidarity with the victims, Chief Albert Luthuli, the President General of the African National Congress, ANC, Nelson Mandela, and the other ANC members all burned their own passes. Just over a month later, the United Nations General Assembly discussed apartheid for the first time, declaring that it was in violation of the United Nations Charter. On the 1st July 1960, the day after the independence of the Congo, the Republic of Ghana was proclaimed. On the 27th April, a general election had been held alongside a referendum on the creation of an executive presidency. The referendum in favor of the presidency passed, and Nkrummah, who won the election, became Ghana's first president. The role of the Governor General, which had been held by Lord Listowel since independence, was obsolete now that Ghana was a republic. A photograph of Listowel walking to his plane to leave Ghana shows Nkrummah cheerfully waving goodbye to the representative of Elizabeth II. Now, 50 years old, Nkrummah was confidently holding the reins of his government. His office and residence had moved from Christiansborg Castle to Flagstaff House in the middle of Accra, which had been the army's headquarters during the colonial days. Work at Flagstaff House, noted Tawia Adamafio, Minister for Presidential Affairs, was mountainous and urgent every minute. Under Nkrummah, Ghana was building a new post-colonial infrastructure to benefit the majority of citizens. Since 1954, Nkrummah had been eager to see the introduction of compulsory and free primary education, and his government was working to accomplish this by 1961, which it did. The school population in Ghana quickly shot up. Whereas in 1960, the number of students enrolled in first grade was just 123,000. The number enrolled in September 1961 was almost 100,000 more. Schools sprang up like mushrooms all over the country, wrote Adamafio, and a great spirit of educational endeavor seized the people and propelled them onto an enthusiastic voluntary effort in the provision of school accommodation. Most villages boasted at least one primary school. Teacher training enrollment increased from 1,916 in 1951 to 4,552 in 1961, an increase of 137.5%. So, yes, university students in that period increased from 208 to 1,204. The number of hospital beds went up from 2,368 to 6,155. Gravel road increased by nearly 60%. Telephones increased by over 345%. Under colonial rule, Ghana's economy had been made dependent on one cash crop, cocoa. This was a huge threat to the economic future of the newly independent country, since the demand for cocoa was dependent on the consumption levels of a handful of Western countries. Moreover, note, Kofi Bernard Adjo, a press aide to Nkrummah, and later the editor of New Africa. The African producer of cocoa was left with very little after the European marketing firms and the colonial taxmen were through with him. Despite this obstacle, according to Adjo, the results of Nkrummah's strategy were impressive. The state invested in oil and sugar refineries, meat canning, soap and paint-making factories, and a vehicle assembly plant. Investments were also directed towards agro-related industries, so as to provide the foundation for meat canning and sugar production. Other initiatives in this sector were designed to lower Ghana's dependence on food imports, such as meat, rice, and sugar. As a result of these policies, Ghana's real gross national product increased by 24.5% between 1960 and 1965. The new enterprises established during this period, Adjo adds, provided the country with a new structural foundation for economic growth. And this occurred despite the dramatic decline in the price of cocoa during the years 1960 to 1965. Not all Nkrummah policies were popular with everybody. Some Ghanaians had reservations about his massive project to build the Volta River Dam at Akosombo in order to produce hydroelectric power for processing Ghana's bauxite into aluminium. New nations, declared Nkrummah, which are determined by every possible means to catch up in industrial strength, must aim for large-scale industrial advance. Electricity is the basis for industrialization. But Dr. Joseph Boakie Danquah, leader of the opposition, described the hydroelectric project as a communist-inspired prestige undertaking. He tried his utmost to ditch the project. Nkrummah persevered. He sought and eventually obtained American funding and technological expertise. Work on the dam started in 1961 and it was inaugurated in January 1966, creating the Volta Lake, which is the third largest artificial lake in the world by volume. The resettlement of 80,000 people into 52 new villages was partnered with the introduction of better living conditions and farming methods. But many people were traumatized when their homes and farms were flooded. There was concern, too, about the environmental impact. The hydroelectric power plant fueled the aluminium smelter and also provided electricity to urban centers. In 2020, the Akosombo Dam provided 85% of Ghana's electricity and also supplied Togo and Benin Republic with power. Wow. One of Nkrummah's actions that worried even some of his most loyal supporters was the Preventive Detention Act of 1958, which gave the government power to detain offenders without trial for 5 years. Joseph Godson Amamu, who served as a diplomat for Nkrummah's government in London, Hungary, and Vienna, pays tribute to the government's huge and transformative achievements in the Ghanaian Revolution. But he is also conscious that mistakes were made, including the Preventive Detention Act. In Ghana, 50 years of independence, Amamo describes the act as notorious because it meant that the vaguest suspicion of political disaffection could lead to swift arrest and detention and to outrageous violations of human rights. Geoffrey Bain, a British left-wing lawyer who was Nkrummah's Attorney General and trusted advisor, much loathed by the British government, was deeply troubled by the act. As a former British member of parliament, he had opposed the Special Powers Act in Northern Ireland, under which political offenders could be imprisoned without trial. As a stubborn opponent of preventive detention anywhere in the United Kingdom, he observed in his memoir, "I would, for this reason alone, have found it hard to accept it in Ghana." His view was modified shortly after the bill was passed. A dangerous tribal conspiracy was discovered. It was clear that it could only be dealt with effectively by the use of special powers. But his scruples never entirely left him. Nkrummah was not without powerful political enemies. His most notable opponent was Dr. J.B. Danquah, who had stood unsuccessfully as a presidential candidate against him in April 1960. Danquah had taken a vigorous role in the struggle for independence from Britain and was widely respected as one of Ghana's founding fathers. A lawyer of distinction, Danquah was the section chairman of the Europe-based International Commission of Jurists, which was revealed in 1967 to have received CIA funding through the American Fund for Free Jurists. Following this revelation, the ICJ successfully pulled away and established itself as an independent organization. Slightly more than 3,000 subscribers received ICJ publications in Africa in the early 1960s. Danquah developed a close association with Pauli Murray, a thin, intense African-American lawyer who arrived in Accra in February 1960 to serve as a faculty member in the newly established Ghana School of Law. She had been urged to take up the position by the trade unionist, Maida Springer, who lived near her in Brooklyn and was a close friend. Through Springer, Murray had met the Kenyan leader, Tom Mboya, in 1956. She picked him up from the airport to take him to Springer's home. She also met with Nyerere and other African nationalist leaders. Murray was a formidable intellectual who was also a poet and later became a priest in the Episcopal Church. But as an interracial woman and active resistor of Jim Crow, she faced many obstacles in her daily and her professional lives. She had keen personal sense of the sufferings wrought through racial oppression. Her grandmother had been born into slavery, and she herself had been brought up by her maternal grandparents in the bitter conditions of segregation. Another difficulty for Murray was that she was sexually attracted to women at a time when homosexuality was against the law in the US and generated prejudice and hatred. Recent interpretations of her archives reveals that she battled with gender dysphoria. At the time existed in the 1930s and 1940s, argues the Black feminist scholar Brittany Cooper. Murray might have identified as a trans man. Biographies published in 2016 and 2017 revealed that well into middle age, Murray tried to obtain hormone replacement therapy